That was spring of 1993 that we started that. By that winter, they were moved into that structure. It's a very, very small, very sculptural, very carefully designed, almost entirely cob structure. And that was only the second building that Yanto and Linda had worked on. So we were in the process of building that. We were learning a lot, teaching ourselves a lot. And a lot of that came from just having, a pretty experimental attitude of what would happen if we did this? What are the limits of this material? How far can we push it? So this shelf up here is built using a technique called corbelling. It's made entirely out of cob. There's no reinforcing in it other than just extra straw. And that was a technique that we came up with while working on that heart house, Linda's second house. We built a shelf like this for a bookshelf, never having done it before or seen it done or heard of it. And I'm not clear exactly where the idea came from. I presume it was probably Yanto's invention. But as the wall continued to go up, the cob wall continued to go up, we needed a scaffolding to access the top of the wall for building. And I remember the day that I found myself sort of hesitantly putting one foot and then the other foot onto this cob shelf to see whether it would support me, and kind of half thinking that the whole thing was going to collapse and I was going to end up on the ground. That didn't happen, and pretty soon we had 4 or 5 people standing on a shelf about like this, continuing to cob the wall up over our heads. And during the process, there was a very magical process of building that structure. Materials kept showing up for us in very kind of magical ways. That we were giving some thought and some attention to things like where's the light and the sun going to be on the solstices and the equinoxes and that sort of thing. But the actual manifestation of how those things interact within that building were partially serendipitous also. So there's a circumstance, for example, where at sunrise on the summer solstice, the sun, and really only for a day or two on either side of summer solstice, the rising sun comes in through a certain window and casts a certain pattern right above the wood stove in the house. And this is something that is one of Yanto's big strengths, is noticing and paying attention to the sort of cosmology of the place where we are, and building in and designing into our living structures little signals and little reminders that things are changing, that the earth is moving, that the cycles of time are passing and continuing and returning. And that's really a departure from how most of our architecture and building happens in our culture and in our climate, which is not at all place-centered. It's very typical for buildings to get designed completely without the designers ever having been to the site. It's fairly typical for a lot of the building components to be assembled in a factory somewhere hundreds of miles from the site where they're going to end up. The extreme example of that obviously is the whole mobile home phenomenon, where the structure is built obviously completely independent of the site, and it's trucked in and plunked down on a foundation, and it's incapable, because of how it came to be, it's incapable of really responding to the conditions on the site and having any kind of conversation with the site. And for me, and for Yanto also, I think that's one of the things that makes a good building, is a rich, deep conversation between the building and the things around it, and the people in it too. So a lot of what Cobb Cottage Company came to be was kind of a traveling school, where we would be contacted by somebody who wanted to build a cob house, often, in many cases, somebody who had taken a workshop from us previously, but not exclusively. And we would bring a workshop to that person's site and help through the process of teaching workshop. We would help with the construction of the building. That's still a lot of what Janto and Linda do, and what I do a little bit of, but less than I used to. So we started traveling and teaching mostly up and down the west coast of the United States and into BC, but a little bit wider. Janto particularly has traveled a lot more to Western Europe, the Eastern United States, and other places too. But I think it was very, very valuable for us to travel and experience the conditions on all these different sites, to go to and sort of seed or fertilize a new pocket of culture in different places. What we found, kind of to our surprise, was that there was, despite the fact that there had been no cob construction done in the last 100 years in the United States, and practically none in Britain during the same period of time, lots of people were really interested in this stuff. It had some kind of appeal that was extremely strong for lots of people. And nowadays, although I certainly wouldn't say that cob is a household word in the United States, a lot of people know about it. In the last 3 years, we've sold something like 30,000 books. So I'm fairly sure there's hundreds of thousands of people at least, possibly more, possibly millions, at this point who, if you said cob building, wouldn't think you were talking about corn cobs, which is what most people who've never heard of it before think. And that's pretty rapid rate of dissemination into the culture over seems like a very short period of time to me. So at least in a certain segment of the population that may be predisposed to pay attention to this kind of stuff, the technique has made pretty significant inroads into the consciousness and the collective imagination quite quickly.